Initiation by Robert Hugh Benson, Part 3, Chapter 4, Part 1, Subsection 1. "Now just describe the whole place," said Neville, leaning back. "No, I won't have a cigarette, old man. They taste beastly. Go on, Aunt Anna." She had been on the morning of the next day, at Neville's request, to see over the nursing home and to bring back a full report. The last 24 hours had passed, as time does pass, with a deadly swift kind of slowness, like the moving of wheels that neither jar nor sway. He had lain down after lunch. Then she had gone to have tea with him and had read to him afterwards. He had come across from his room after dinner and had sat with her and Algie, too, who was under orders to come in for every principal meal until further notice, and she had played for a while on the big grand piano that was in the drawing-room. The next morning after breakfast she had read his letters to him and then gone off to view the battlefield. They had not talked any more at all as to the future or the past. He had really meant what he had said. They formed no plans. They reviewed nothing. They merely waited. Aunt Anna drew off her gloves. She had come straight in from the hall and through the drawing-room, and had found Algie in the library window seat, and Neville in a big chair with his hands before him. The voices stopped talking suddenly as she came in. "Well, I've seen all over it," she said. "I like it, yes I do, and I like the people and the nurses and the whole thing." "Go on." "It's in Curzon Passage, as you know. St. Joseph's is just across the way. I went in there for a minute or two afterwards. Well, the drawing-room is just like any other drawing-room, but you won't see much of that, you poor dear. Mrs. Brantz came in almost at once. She's a Catholic, you know, and most of the nurses are." "What's she like?" "She didn't say very much. She's quite grey. She's very small with very delicate features. She was extremely well dressed." "I like that," put in Neville. "That's form. Let's be decently dressed anyhow." "Well, then she asked whether I wouldn't like to see your room. So we went upstairs, and did you see the operating place? The theater, isn't it, as I told you?" "Yes," said Aunt Anna steadily. "I saw it on the way up." "Well?" "It is a little room on the top of the first flight. It's perfectly white and looks very clean and fresh." "Tiles on the walls?" "I think so. The bed arrangement is a stretcher covered with sheets and blankets. It faces the window in the middle. There are things to wheel about, plate glass tables. There are disinfectant jars and so on. There's a kind of small stove to disinfect the instruments in. It all looks very empty and clean. It has 2 doors onto the landing. One is a baize floor. See the instruments?" "No." "Well, then we went upstairs. Your room's at the top, looking out on the back. It's quite big. It's very nicely furnished. The bed's in the middle of the room with its head against the wall, and the bell and electric switch are within reach. It has wardrobes and tables and everything. It's extremely nice in every way. Then Miss Brantz sent for your nurse." "Well?" "I like her particularly. She is a Catholic, by the way, and Irish. She's tall and very quiet, with grey eyes and dark hair. Her uniform is delightful." "What color?" "Blue, with a white apron and a white linen cap." "Will she be there during the operation?" "Yes, and Miss Brantz too. Miss Brantz is a fully qualified nurse, by the way. And you asked all about the operation too?" Yes." Her voice trembled a little, but she recovered herself. "They asked me whether you'd prefer to be put under the anesthetic in your own room, or whether you'd walk down to the theater." "Yes?" "I said to do exactly what they preferred, as you told me. Well, of course, they'd sooner you went down to the theater. They said, yes. They said some people couldn't stand that. I said I was sure you could." "Go on." "Well, it's fixed for 9:30. The surgeon and the anesthetist will be ready by then. Then the nurse comes to tell you, and you put on a dressing gown and slippers and walk downstairs. Then you climb up onto the bed and they give you chloroform. Then you wake up in your own room. They carry you back before you recover consciousness." "How long will it take?" "They can't tell for certain. It depends on what they find. It'll probably be between 2 and 3 hours. Then I shall just be in time for lunch?" "My dear, you won't want any lunch. You won't want anything at all that day. But of course you'll have to have something whether you want it or not." "Oh, shall I?" said Neville defiantly. "We'll see about that. By the way, shall I be able to see when I wake up? Did you ask about that?" "They hope so," said Anna. "It depends on what they find." There was a pause. It had been a considerable effort to relate all this, and she was glad for once that he could not see her face. She could not have done it at all if it had not been for the day and the night that had passed since sentence had been pronounced. But she had just had enough time to wrench her attitude to his, and to meet it with the mingled silence and frankness with which he was facing it himself. "Algie," he said presently. The figure in the window seat turned around. He had been staring very earnestly out into the garden while she had been giving her descriptions. "Yes, old man? Think it sounds all right?" "First rate. You'll be downstairs with Aunt Anna, won't you, on Tuesday?" "Why, yes," said Algie. "Aunt Anna, I wish you'd ask Maresfield in to dinner tomorrow. I suppose you'll be going to church, won't you?" "Of course, I'll ask him." "Yes, I had thought of going, unless you wanted me." "And that reminds me," continued Neville. "How long do they starve me for before the affair comes off?" Yes, I asked them that too. You won't be starved much. You'll have a light lunch on Monday, soon after you arrive, but not much else. Just a cup of tea about 5 and some soup later. That's all? Yes, that's all. Subsection 2. It is said of convicted criminals that, of the period between sentence and execution, the worst time is not, as might be expected, the night before the execution, but the night immediately after the sentence. Neville found this, in its measure, to be true of himself. The Friday night had been a considerable burden, for, alone there in the dark, he had been able to face facts with a deliberation that had scarcely been possible during the day. But the result was that by Saturday morning his attitude had been arranged and established. The Saturday night was considerably easier, and the Sunday night easier still. Maresfield had come and gone. His breezy, abrupt personality had been a distinct stimulus, and Neville awoke on Monday morning in a state of far less apprehensiveness than he would have thought possible 3 days before. The start was made about 10:30, for his orders were that he must be in the home by 11 to begin his grim preparations. Medicine had to be taken. The top of his head had to be shaved. He had, all round, to settle in and be made comfortable. He had a few minutes of loneliness and even of a little horror as he sat, dressed, in the drawing-room before the arrival of Algy, listening to the preparations in his room across the hall, the passing of Charleston's footsteps and Aunt Anna's, the carrying out of bags, and the 1 or 2 returns that were made for small things that had been overlooked. He felt very helpless, like an intelligent sheep waiting for the coming of the temple attendants. Then, at last, he heard Aunt Anna come in, and that she did not shut the door behind her. "Now, my dear," she said, "we're ready." They did not talk much on the way. Vaguely he tried to follow their route. "We're at Hyde Park Corner, aren't we?" he said, and then again, "Now to the right, isn't it?" And at last the car stopped. He felt yet more helpless as he was led indoors. He could hear a rustle, as of 2 or 3 people, as he came in through the door on the right. "How do you do, Sir Neville?" came a very gentle voice that, for all its gentleness, had a considerable strength to it. He put out his hand, smiling with an effort, and felt it taken in the small hand of a woman. She retained it as she led him forward to a chair. "There," she said. "Now, if you'll allow me, I'll leave you for 5 minutes while I just look upstairs once more, and then, I'm afraid, I shall have to take you away." He murmured something polite, and heard her go out. "I like her voice," he said, "but I suppose it's like walking along the street to her. I wonder if she knows—" He stopped. That line would not do. "Room smells all right," he said genially. "Not a bit what I thought it would be," remarked Algy. "Well, what did you expect?" "Oh, I don't know. I thought it would be dingy or pious or something." Yes, this was certainly the right line, thought poor Anna. Naturalness was the only possible attitude. Yet her whole heart longed to turn Algy out of the room and say, she did not know what she wanted to say. Something to Neville. She would not see him again, she knew, for at least 48 hours. He must be delivered over to other hands than hers, hands which, however tender or skillful, held knives and basins and bandages. But this naturalness was better, and she herself managed to say something presently about the old mirror over the mantelpiece. Then, after what seemed an incredibly short interval, the door opened once more, and the dainty little gray-haired lady stood on the threshold. It was they who had to go first, after all. "Well, good luck, old man," said Algy, and shook him warmly by the hand. "Goodbye, my dear," said Aunt Anna. "We shall both be here tomorrow, you know." He felt her warm lips linger on his forehead. There was a rustle. There was a sound of footsteps. Then the hall door closed heavily. He stood waiting. Then there came the sound of another step. "Ah, here is Nurse Deacon," said the gentle voice. "This is your patient, nurse." It was a long way upstairs, and the space seemed rather contracted. Miss Brants went before, directing him at the corners. The nurse came behind. At the top of the first flight he stopped, for not only did he remember what Aunt Anna had told him, but he perceived a very distinct and peculiar smell, not unpleasant, but reminding him of a chemist's shop. Smells had come to mean a good deal to him during these last days. "This is the theater, isn't it?" he said. "Yes. How did you know?" By the tone he guessed that she smiled. "My aunt told me. Besides, I can smell it." Halfway up the next flight a thought struck him. "Any operations this morning, Miss Brants?" "Yes, 2. "Doing well, I hope?" "Splendidly." He perceived by her tone that he must not be inquisitive. He wondered why. Surely they weren't afraid for his nerve. "Here we are," she said at last, and took him by the hand to lead him forward. "Sit down a minute, Sir Neville, and get your breath. It's a long way upstairs." This room smelt charmingly of flowers and of absolutely nothing else. He perceived that he was facing the light, and from the warmth on one side, he understood that there was a fire on the right. He considered these things while she talked. "Can you get ready for bed by yourself?" she asked. "Or would you sooner have nurse to help you, or your manservant?" "Thanks very much," he said hastily. "I can do it by myself." Then the door shut, and he understood that the nurse was gone. "May I sit down for a minute or two?" asked the other voice. "There are just one or two things I would like to mention." "Why, certainly," he said, wondering what in the world they could be. "The first is about the other patients. You know we have to have a very strict rule here that patients shouldn't know about one another. It would never do. So I know I can ask you, quite simply, not to ask any questions. The nurses have orders in any case not to answer." Yes, this lady had plenty of the governing faculty, he perceived. Her voice had not belied her. He assented, and said that he quite understood. "Thank you, Sir Neville. And the next thing is about yourself. The male patients sometimes have a certain difficulty in their minds about the nurses. I want just to remind you, if I may, that it's all perfectly natural to the nurses to look after patients in every way. It's their ordinary accustomed work. You won't feel any difficulty about it, will you?" "I'll remember," said Neville. "Thank you. The third thing is about a priest. The fathers at St. Joseph's can always send a priest at any time, day or night. We never, of course, suggest this to Catholic patients. This is not our business. Our business is the body, not the soul. But if you should want a priest to hear your confession tonight or at any time, or to bring you Holy Communion, you only have to say so. We are quite accustomed to that. And it is the same, of course, for Protestants." "Thank you very much," said Neville. "I don't think, just at present—" "Just so," said the quiet, steady voice. "Then I'll leave you now, Sir Neville, so soon as I've shown you where the bed is, and so on. Your man is here, and will come up when you're in bed, unless you'd like him now." "No, I can manage all right, thank you. I hate to be waited upon, you know." Again, he could tell by her tone that she smiled. "I'm afraid you'll have to submit here," she said. "Now let me show you."